we're going to dive into the second part of the webinar, which is what I call the techie view, or another way to think about it is the administrative view. And this is where we'll get into some of these really tough but important questions around cost and security and data ownership and accessibility that a lot of you may have. So before I get to that, exactly what I want to do is talk about what does the life of the IT person like with the server, if you have a server and you're running servers, the traditional setup, versus if you're in the cloud. So this is our Mr. Happy IT guy, or Mrs. Happy IT girl, or Ms. Happy IT girl, I should say, and their little server, or multiple servers. So as you can see, your server could be used for storing files, it could be used for storing your database, for maybe tracking donors, it could be managing your email system, it could be allowing you to collaborate through a tool such as SharePoint. There's many different things you can put on a server. A lot of tasks that go along with managing a server. Some of those include making sure that the server is properly backed up, and it has to be, of course, you always have to have a backup in an off-site location in case there's some damage to your physical office and you lose. There's no point in having a backup if there's damage to your office and you lose both of your backups, as well as the original. You also need to make sure that the server is properly secured. This could be from random hackers from the outside trying to get in. Again, they'd probably not be targeting you directly, but they may just be targeting you as a part of their grander hacking scheme. It could be from malware or other issues that your own employees may inadvertently bring in. Whatever it is, so you need to make sure your antivirus is up to date, that you've got your firewall properly configured, that you have all the patches applied so that you are up to date for any latest security issues that have been discovered. And you always need to make sure that your server is on a fairly recent version that is supported, especially if you're using Microsoft Server. Some of Microsoft's server products, they'll regularly release different versions, and that's important from a security perspective as well to keep that relatively up to date. So that's a lot of work for the IT person to have to do to make sure that that server is up and running properly, and that's not even that none of that's actually connected to your work as an organization. It's just the background that you need to do the same way that you need to keep the lights running. As well as that, of course, there's work to administer the actual server, so that's where stuff like managing permissions and creating appropriate policies comes into place. So in the cloud, things look a little bit differently. And this is an extreme example I've shown you where you moved everything on your server to everything in the cloud. And certainly there's a lot of models in between. You could have some things on a server, some things in the cloud. But for the sake of this this point that I'm making, I'll put everything in the cloud. So all your database, all your files, instead of having a server, you're accessing through the internet. So maybe your files are stored in a program like box.net, or maybe it's stored in just a service that provides simply space on a server, and you access them through that. So there's a lot of different options. So how does that change the IT person's role? So there's still certain tasks that are needed to administer, such as creating policies and managing permissions. So there is still work to do administration in the cloud. It's just significantly reduced. There's also way more stuff that your IT person can do. There's much a bigger role for technology in your organization. There's work you can do in terms of managing process. You can experiment with new tools, working to further align the IT with the mission of your organization. And these are critically important things, but maybe they don't happen because you're spending all your energy and resources on the really technical details of IT. Now, if you're one of the people that doesn't actually have any IT person and you're thinking, okay, this isn't relevant for me, well, this is all the more important because that first scenario I described wasn't even a possibility for you. So the fact that you could actually get some of this through the cloud is, as I mentioned before, really one of the strong arguments cloud for small organizations. So, but what about security in the cloud? And what about, is my data safe and is my data private? Will people get access to it who shouldn't? Is it more expensive in the cloud than to be on that file server? Obviously, we want to all be really careful about our money that we're spending, and we should be as nonprofits. So, to me, I think, to summarize, if I had to say one thing about all these issues, it's a matter of control. And when I say control, what I mean by that is that who is in control of these different things? Are you in control, or is the cloud provider in control? And that's a decision you have to make, because there's certainly, I put this on a balance scale, and don't be misled by the fact that the cloud provider is better. I don't want to suggest that the cloud is always the better option, but I want to point out that there's risks and benefits on both sides of the equation in every single case that we talk about. Whether we talk about cost, whether we talk about security, it's always a balancing scale. And I'd like to give you easy answers, but there aren't any. Unfortunately, it's up to every single organization to figure out what do these, what is the trade-off for me? Do the risks outweigh the benefits of the cloud? Or the risks of what I currently have, do the benefits of the cloud outweigh that? So let's dive into these issues a bit more, but as we do that, I want you to keep this context in mind of understanding that it's always a matter of weighing the balance, that there are always trade-offs either way. So anyone who says to you that the cloud is perfect and there's no problems, or that the cloud is evil and terrible and will eat all your data and is awful, there's no black and white here. So these are the topics that I want to talk about specifically, because to me these are the main areas where you give up control in going to the cloud. You give up control of the cost, of the features, of the availability, of your security, of your backup, and in some ways, and I'll explain this one later, in some ways you give up your data, not in every way. So let's dive in. When I think about costs, what are the costs associated with running any software system? There's a few main ones that I think about, and someone might break this down differently, but I think about licensing costs. So that's either the cost of, say, buying your copy of Windows Server 2008, or that's that monthly fee that you're paying for the cloud service. There's the cost of administration. So outside of the cloud, that's your IT person who's making sure that your server is secure and backed up and working properly. Or in the cloud, that's that matter of you do need to do a bit of configuration stuff, and sometimes that's something that a non-technical person in the organization can take on, but there is a little bit of time associated with it. And the third is the cost of migration. Moving to any new system, there's going to be costs associated with it, whether it's a cost of time or whether it's a cost of actually bringing in outside expertise to help with the process. So what are the benefits and trade-offs? And so as I mentioned before, it's kind of like this buying a house versus renting an apartment scenario, especially when it comes to licensing. That's the trade-off. And again, it's a matter of calculating which is actually more cost-effective for you. But I mentioned these other costs of administration and migration because you need to factor them in. Yes, if you can get on the free version of Google Apps, it will certainly be cheaper, but if you have an existing system right now, what is it going to cost you in terms of time or in terms of consulting expertise to move? Certainly with a lot of these, they've made it as simple as possible, but you can't just assume that there's no cost associated at all. The one other point I want to quickly make here is that you don't actually have control over what the licensing costs are in the cloud, and sometimes they do change outside of your control. So what I mean by this, I'll give you one example of this social network Ning, which allowed you to create a private online community for your nonprofit or any other organization. So I certainly know a lot of nonprofits who use this tool and who still use it, and some of you may have used it as well. It's a great tool, but one of the things about Ning is that they used to have a free version, and at some point they decided, for whatever reasons, to get rid of that free version and make it paid only. So this is the challenge, is that as an organization that subscribes to Ning, maybe you had a great online community going in the free version, and now you have a tough choice. Do we upgrade to a paid version, which is not what we bargained for initially, or do we get out of Ning and move to a different platform altogether? And how do we do that? How do we even get our data out? I'll come back to that later. But from the point of view of costs, you do have to realize there's no obligating the cloud provider to actually stay at the same cost. It is one of the risks of being in the cloud, is that they can change that at any point. And again, I say this, and I'll be saying more things later about the risks of the cloud. I'll be talking more about the risks of the cloud because often the risks of not being in the cloud are fairly well known. And I don't say this to totally scare you off. I say it because, like I said at the beginning, I want you to be informed about the different options and the different risks of going into the cloud, so you can make an informed decision for yourself. So, features. The best way to think of this is any of you who use Facebook will know exactly what I mean when I talk about not being in control of features. If you have been on Facebook for a while, you'll remember when the news feed came out, and there was immediately an uproar. The idea that you could see this news feed of every person's little action. Oh, somebody changed their status. Somebody posted a picture. It seemed so weird and invasive, and people hated it, and people complained and complained about it. But eventually the complaints died down, and people got used to it. And it was okay. You know, you adjusted to it until some new feature came out, and then everybody rebelled against that. And the point of this is that you don't have control over those features. There's no one who has the option to say, well, I don't want the news feed. I want Facebook like it was in 2008, and I'm not interested in what it's like right now. That's not an option. You know, if you're using Office, you can stay on 2003 forever, but if you're on Facebook, you're going to be using the most recent version of Facebook, no matter whether you like it or not. So on the plus side, one of the advantages of the features constantly changing is that you do always get the most up-to-date version all the time, and it's done in incremental changes. So for example, the jump from Microsoft Office 2003 to Microsoft Office 2007, for those of you who made that jump, that was a big move because it introduced a totally new interface, the ribbon interface, which a lot of people didn't like. It took people a long time to get used to it, whereas often with cloud tools, features are released a lot more incrementally in just a little smaller doses, so that you gradually adjust and get used to it. But the point is that at the end of the day, you have to be aware that you don't have control of the features. And sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing. I next want to mention availability, because this comes back to what I said before, in part about if you don't have the access to the internet, or if you don't have access to the cloud service for whatever reason, if, you know, maybe you can connect to the internet but they're down, then you're kind of stuck. There's just no way to get access to your files or your programs if that cloud service is down. On the plus side, most cloud services have in their contract that they have a 99.9% uptime. That's the standard for the industry at the moment, which is pretty good. That's way better than you'll actually be able to manage with your IT person running your own server. You're probably not going to get 99.9% uptime. But it can be really scary if you are in a cloud service. Then suddenly, for whatever reason, it doesn't load right away, and you think, what? I'm connected to the internet. What happened? Why isn't this working? And you're panicked and pressing the refresh button again and again, and you know, a second later it comes back and it was fine, but for that moment you felt this, what was going to happen? What happens if I can't get access to this document? It can be a little scary. So as I said, fortunately this happens rarely, but it has been known to happen. The good thing with most major cloud providers is that they have so many important business customers, not that you're not important, but for some reason they seem to value large businesses a little bit more sometimes, is that they really need to have high standards. So they are so motivated to get that service back online as soon as possible. So it's rarely an issue for a long term. Usually these are just quite short things that happen, but again, it's one of the risks of being in the cloud. On the plus side, you do have to be realistic and think about, on the flip side, if your own server goes down, you're going to be in much worse trouble. You won't have a huge team actually working to bring it back up. You'll probably have your one belaggard IT person. So in a sense, the risk is actually lower there in the cloud, but it can feel quite nerve-wracking if it ever happens to you. Now, I do want to touch on security, which is, of course, a huge topic related to the cloud, and I don't have time to get into this in nearly as much depth as I'd like to. But I do want to address a few of the concerns because, of course, everybody has concerns about security in the cloud, and they are really important. And people have concerns about a related issue, which is privacy. Often, a privacy breach happens because of a security breach, because someone hacked in and got your data. So I do see the two as being interconnected. And the main question I want you to ask here is that, is the security in the cloud better than what you have right now? So as I said, if you have a server right now or you don't even have a server, if you have a server, then it's up to your IT person to keep everything secure. But you also need security in all your systems. So that security is only as good as the programs you use and how up to date you keep them, and how just generally a good a job your IT person is doing at securing your server. So they may be doing a very good job, but you could also be compromising the security in other ways. For example, I'm sure a lot of you follow the very common practice in nonprofits of putting a nice little sticky note with your password, or maybe in a little notebook with all of your important passwords on it and keeping that right next to your desk. So that's not incredibly secure. That's actually probably more of a concern than anything you might find with security in the cloud. I don't recommend that as a practice, by the way. So take a serious look at what is your security right now versus in the cloud. Typically with any established provider, you're going to be looking at a lot of effort and a lot of energy and a lot of experts dedicated to actually making sure that's secure. It's not something that you can ever provide at your nonprofit. However, there is that scary factor of, okay, hackers might be attracted to that bigger target that the cloud represents, and something could happen, and there could be a breach, and there have been. So what I want to point out is that there's security risks on either side. This is one where I've tried to provide some more information for you in the further reading, if you want to explore this further. And there are standards as well you can look up for cloud providers and what level of security. So for example, checking if they encrypt your data. Most good ones should. Do you access it over an HTTPS connection, which is a secure connection? So those are a few of the kind of things you want to check for just to make sure that your cloud provider does have good security standards. The one other thing that I should mention on this topic is that I don't know how much of an issue this is for U.S. organizations, but I do know for organizations outside the U.S., sometimes there's a concern about data being stored in the United States and laws such as the Patriot Act and how that impacts them. So basically, for those of you who don't know, the Patriot Act is a law that was put into place after 9/11, and among other things, it does give the U.S. government access to be able to request data from cloud providers if they think some issue of criminal concern, or if there's an issue related to terrorism and they need to get that data. So in all honesty, while this is kind of scary, it's not super relevant to a lot of organizations. However, if you do something that's really politically sensitive, this is something you'll want to learn more about and investigate very carefully before you go into the cloud. One of the requests from the government that is actually well known is about WikiLeaks and data related to WikiLeaks. So it's something to watch out for. One of the plus sides of the cloud is that basically you get backup for free. Because the cloud provider needs to keep multiple copies of your data in case one of their servers goes down, they are keeping multiple copies of your data, and if something happened to your office or your own computers, your data would still be safe in the cloud. Most cloud providers, any established decent cloud provider, will also have multiple locations of their servers. So again, if something happened to your data in one location, it would still be in another. On the flip side, you certainly can do a good job of backing up your data in your own organization, but make sure you do. If you choose to go the server route and you don't want to use the cloud at all, make sure you have a really good backup. There's one organization that I've provided the link for the story, but they were really concerned about going to the cloud for security reasons, and just because they had heard bad things, not for any specific reason in particular. And so they opted to go with their own server, which is fine, but they didn't make sure that they backed it up properly. And incidentally, of course, it happens before some major event, their office was struck by lightning and all of their data was lost because they didn't have a backup. So of course this can be easily prevented by having a backup in place, but if you're a small organization that knows that in practice you're never going to think of backup stuff, if you just use the cloud, then it's taken care of for you. You don't really have to think about it, and that can just be a huge weight off your mind. The last issue that I'll point out is the importance of, can you get your data both in and out of your cloud provider? Usually getting data in isn't too difficult because they want you to switch their service, but some cloud providers make it easier than others to get your data back out, and this is an issue if you have to switch for whatever reason, whether it's unplanned in case or whether it's a planned migration that you just want to move to a new system. You'd have to look up specifically for your cloud provider how they deal with it. I know one of the really good examples is Google actually has they have a site which I've provided you the link to called the Data Liberation Project, and that's actually their effort to make sure that as much as possible from every one of their tools you can get your data back out in a format that's non-proprietary and open. So that's one of the reasons that I actually even just did this morning with Google Docs. I was able to download a copy of all my Google documents to my computer in a format that I could read. So sometimes it's just nice knowing that you have that backup on your computer, and that if any reason anything went wrong, I'll be able to access all of those files.